come. You play with fire and burn.
The way I'm setting up this El Camino, there's no plans for it, there's no instruction manual. I'm building it as I go, and I'm learning as I go. Not only is the car built in a way that an El Camino is not supposed to be built, I'm putting an engine and transmission combo that didn't come stock in the car, so I have to make everything fit on its own. Not only that, but to get proper weight balance and hopefully get close to the balance of a Corvette, because the suspension is from the C4 Corvette. I've moved the motor back approximately 8.5 inches, give or take. First things first is I had to make some room inside the stock subframe of the C4 Corvette. I should have plenty of room now to get in there and make the motor mounts how I need them to fit. Any kind of shape or any kind of geometry or anything sort of crazy I have to build, I should have room to work around it. Next step up after that is I'm going to take all the accessories off the engine so I can get it in there and make sure it all fits. Like, without the accessories, I can get the engine to fit more snug and more proper, and that way also I don't have them all in my way when I'm trying to figure out how my brackets are going to go or how they're going to look. The accessories will sit in front of the block, obviously, so that's all completely out of the way from where I'm working, and that'll give me plenty of room just to figure things out. No stress, keep it cool, think slow. The easiest way to figure out where to put holes when making a plate for something like this, which is the motor mount, I'm making the section that goes onto the block itself. So to figure out exactly where those So to figure out exactly where those 4 bolts are gonna sit on the plate, I took a piece of paper, put it on, and did kind of like you would do with a pencil, and over some sort of shape to give it like I rubbed my dirty greasy fingers on it, and it showed me exactly where the 4 holes were gonna be. So I took those holes, that plate I made, that piece of paper, I transferred it over to a metal plate and punched all my holes accordingly. That gave me exactly the bolt hole size I needed, proper spacing, proper measurement, and everything. Easy, done. Put all the metal into the vise, punch your hole, drill a small little pilot hole, and then make your size hole as big as you need, whether you're using drill bits or step bits or anything. Put it in the vise though, and make sure you tighten that sucker down real good, because sometimes with an electric drill or anything, you can catch that metal and send it flying. If you got your hand holding that to a bench or something like that, you might lose a couple digits. At the end of the day, the simplest way that I found was using the drill bit, or using the drill press. Just keep going nice and slow and steady. Spray some oil on that so it doesn't get all jammed up, and bore out the hole to the size you need. After having the plates cut out, all the holes drilled in it to where I needed it, I could test fit it onto the block, make sure it all fits out, make sure it all lines up, make sure it fits good both sides. And then I took the 2 plates and I put them next to each other, put them in the vise, and did the appropriate trimming on the metal to make sure that it kind of looks uniform and they're about the same size, because I don't want it to look like backyard, don't know what you're doing kind of thing. Even though I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm just learning as I go. But I want it to look nice and proper and professional when it's done. So making sure everything lines up, everything's the same size, everything matches, it's probably a good place to start. Make sure you take the time to deburr all the holes that you just drilled and all the passes that you made with the grinder, because sharp edges and stuff, even if you paint it, it doesn't look good, it doesn't look very professional at all either. You want to smoothen those off. And the other thing is too, when you're handling your steel like that, when it's a fresh cut and there's not deburred, chances are you're going to slice up your fingers real good, and that's not fun either. You end up bleeding all over them, you know what I mean? Basically, this entire process was again repeated for the transmission, which was only 2 bolts, so that was pretty easy. Problem with the transmission, one of those bolts is broken in there and there's a little piece sticking out, so I'm gonna have to deal with that later before the final assembly, before everything's put back together. The other half of putting together these motor mounts is the part of the motor mount that's going to sit on the chassis. Now the thing is with this, I kind of wanted to make it so I can remove that also, so that when I take everything apart, I have maximum room to work, and this also makes it a little bit easier when I'm building it, because I have to kind of test fit it a bunch of times over and over again and making sure that everything works out. So having it able to unbolt and come completely out was probably the best. I think it's a good idea. Once again, mostly the same process that I did on the upper motor mounts is the same thing over again. Measure everything out, drill the holes, deburr it, grind it, make sure it fits together, make sure they're the same size, both sides match, it's uniform, it looks good, it looks kind of professional. The difference on this one was welding a nut to the bottom of some of the plates. That would give me the chance to have some sort of fastener that's welded into plates and not have to try to get in there with a wrench or whatever to hold it, because it's obviously in an awkward position underneath the engine, underneath the car, whatever it may be. I just wanted to make it simple, easy to work on. That's the whole idea of this thing. It's going to be a race car built from scratch, so there's going to be a lot of trial, a lot of error. I know it's going to break down all the time. There's going to have a whole bunch of things we're going to have to go through, so the idea here is to make that whole process as simple as possible. So being able to undo the motor mounts from both the engine and the chassis should be alright. I guess that's kind of a factory thing anyway, but I'm just trying to do the best I can to make it as easy as possible. Once all those plates are made, everything is in place. I have a plate mounted to the motor, I have a plate mounted to the chassis, which are both removable for ease of access. It's time to pick the engine and transmission up once again and get that inside of the chassis so that I can figure out exactly how big I have to make those motor mounts, how tall, where it's going to connect, and all the angles and pitches, and make sure everything sits the way I want it to sit to get proper alignment everywhere.
I'm just hoping someone break my fall. Fell off this cloud 9 of mine, and in no tiny shine, but now it's my time to shine. And I'm not the kind of guy you should put aside. I'm the type of guy that's ride or die, just like Bonnie and Clyde.
It was a little tricky to get this to sit properly. Most of the time I was trying to balance it on a bunch of wooden blocks and make little spacers out of metal that I had used, or leftover pieces I had cut, just to get it to shimmed out the proper way I needed it to. And it was a little tricky doing it, because if I got it to move one way I wanted it to, it would move in another way I wouldn't want it to, like on a different axis. So this was a battle that took longer than anticipated and required a bit more patience than I thought as well, and required a bit more patience than I imagined as well. This entire part of the process was nothing but measuring and moving and knocking things a little bit and making them sit properly, measuring again and measuring and measuring and going over everything, checking every spot, every measurement on it, make sure it was good, square, lined up, straight. It was a battle. So everything's sitting where it needs to be. It's time to start making the rest of the mounts. I started by making plates that would mount the transmission. A little plate that I made that sits on the transmission, it would mount that to the actual transmission mount itself inside the El Camino. Now, the way it sits, I was fortunate enough to be able to use the stock cross member for the transmission mount, welded plates onto it with the new mounting bracket that sits on the transmission. So everything in that department should be perfectly fine and work out good. The way it's built, I can easily space it out if I have to make any kind of other special adjustments or any kind of thing for the pitch of the drive shaft, it's all right there and it should be easily done. The passenger side of the engine was fairly straightforward, fairly simple. I just took a piece of tubing that I had left over from building the roll cage, chopped it down to the appropriate size, the appropriate angle, and it kind of fit right in. I was able to weld it into place on the two plates that are removable, and on the passenger side I now have a complete working, functioning motor mount. Driver's side, however, was kind of a different story because on that side I have to clear the steering column. Because the steering rack is mounted to the subframe, it's sitting inside the El Camino chassis right now. I have a pretty good idea where that's going to pass through. So I was able to take measurements and build something around it. Now my solution was taking that plate sheet metal that I used to build the back half of the chassis for this truck and that I've used for all my mounts so far, was taking that and cutting it into an L shape. Two pieces that I'm going to square off eventually, but for now, I made my two pieces, spaced them out where I needed them to, used the magnet to hold it in straight, and then tack welded it into place. Make sure everything was clean and clear and fit. And since I was pretty confident, or I am pretty confident that's gonna work out, I welded it in a little bit stronger because even though it's just there like to be mocked up and it's not the final weld process yet of it, I've still gotta clean it up and make the welds better and stronger, maybe add a few additional pieces in for support and box it off like I said. But I want it to be strong enough to be able to hold that engine in place right now because chances are that it's going to be a couple weeks, a couple months that motor's sitting there and not moving right now, and it's going to be sitting there so I can make everything else fit and kind of work around that. Now things are going pretty smooth. I have a complete rolling chassis. I changed the front and rear suspensions completely, mounting C4 Corvette suspension into a 71 El Camino chassis. It was by no means an easy task, but I did it. I got it done. The motor and transmission are now sitting inside the car. I made the mounts. I know everything where it's going to fit, where it's going to sit, and how I'm going to make it all nice and solid and very functional and strong. And the next step for fabrication is going to be my favorite part. I've been anticipating this for a while. We're going to start building the roll cage real soon. So look forward to that coming at you next week. New episode. Peace out. See you guys soon.